February 18, 1943. Outskirts of Kharkov, Ukraine. The snow is no longer white. It's the color of mud, soot, and blood. German Feldwebel Karl Weiss trudges through the churned slush, the distant echo of Soviet artillery rolling across the plains. His unit, remnants of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, has just overrun a Soviet convoy. Burnt-out trucks litter the road, their hoods open like broken jaws. But at the edge of the wreckage, something catches his eye, a small, boxy vehicle barely singed, its olive paint glinting beneath a layer of frost. Was this Das? One of his men mutters, tapping the hood with the butt of his rifle. Weiss crouches, brushing away grime to reveal embossed letters. Willys. The Germans have seen captured Soviet GAZ trucks, even Lend-Lease Studebakers before. But this machine looks different. Compact, muscular, and almost toy-like, yet solid. The steering wheel gleams. The seats are intact. A few bullet holes scar the body, but the engine, improbably, looks untouched. Bring it in, Weiss orders. Let's see what the Americans build. By dusk, mechanics from the division's motor pool are circling the Jeep like priests at an altar. They pry open the hood, and the reaction is unanimous awe. The 4-cylinder Go Devil engine, though simple, looks nearly new. Everything, from the fuel lines to the starter, is accessible, efficient. Not elegant, but brutally practical. An Unteroffizier named Dieter, who's been struggling with the finicky Kübelwagen, shakes his head. Unseer Wagen, Sie Sturben im Schlamm, Aber Diocese Ding. Our cars die in the mud. But this thing? He cranks the ignition. The Jeep sputters, coughs, then roars to life on the first try. The men glance at each other, half smiling, half stunned. In that moment, amid the frozen carcasses of tanks and men, the German soldiers realize something deeply unsettling. The enemy's strength isn't just in numbers or firepower. It's in machines like this. The Willys Jeep had arrived on the Eastern Front, and it would quietly reshape how soldiers saw the war itself. March 3, 1943. Near Belgorod. The captured Willys Jeep now sits inside a drafty German field workshop, a low wooden structure reeking of oil, sweat, and burnt rubber. Outside, the snow melts into thick rivers of mud. Inside, under a hanging lantern, 3 mechanics in black Panzerkorps overalls work in silence. The vehicle has already earned a nickname among the men, Der Kleine Amerikaner, the Little American. Oberstfreiter Hans Meyer wipes his hands on a rag, crouches beside the chassis and mutters, "Verdammt, look at this suspension. Independent front axles, leaf springs, no excess parts." His voice is half irritation, half admiration. He turns to his partner. "Ours rattled to pieces after a week in this muck." The Kübelwagen, Germany's light utility car, had been designed by Ferdinand Porsche himself, built on the Volkswagen Beetle platform. It worked well on dry roads, but on the Russian steppe it sank, spun, and choked. The soldiers had cursed its thin tires and low clearance since the first snow. This American Jeep, though, it floats across mud like a beetle on water. They run tests. The Jeep starts instantly in the morning cold, where even German trucks groan and fail. The engine doesn't overheat. The clutch responds smoothly. And most shocking of all, its parts are stamped with clean, readable serial numbers. Every bolt is standardized. "That's how they do it," Meyer mutters. "Replace, not repair. Each one identical." He glances toward a shelf filled with mismatched German parts scavenged from half a dozen factories. Every repair in the Reichsarmy is a small act of improvisation. A bolt from Berlin, a washer from Bremen, a gasket from Vienna. Nothing ever fits perfectly. But here, in this American contraption, everything does. That evening, as the men smoke outside, one of them says, "They make these by the tens of thousands. Maybe more." Another scoffs. "Impossible. Nobody can build this many cars while fighting a war." But a week later, a report circulates through command channels, intercepted Allied radio traffic and intelligence summaries. It mentions something astonishing. American factories are producing 700 Willys Jeeps per day. 700. Every day. The number spreads through the unit like wildfire, whispered around campfires and tank hatches. It sounds less like manufacturing and more like sorcery. WWII scribbles in his field notebook. The Americans fight a different kind of war. Not of bravery, of machines. If every man can ride one of these, they do not march. They glide. When the Jeep is finally pressed into German service, its stars painted over with a black cross, it becomes the most sought-after vehicle in the battalion. Officers argue over who gets to use it. Even the regimental doctor borrows it to reach wounded men faster than any Kübelwagen could manage. To the Germans, it is no longer the little American. It is the miracle machine. April 15, 1943. South of Kursk. The front is quiet, the kind of silence that means both armies are rebuilding for something terrible. On a muddy track near Prokhorovka, a Soviet reconnaissance platoon lumbers forward in two WWII trucks. Their engines cough like dying animals. Every few kilometers, a driver climbs out with a wrench and a prayer. Then in the distance they see it, a strange, compact vehicle bounding easily over ruts that would snap an axle on their own trucks. Olive green. Square hood. A red star hastily painted over American white. Lieutenant Nikolai Varnin, a former taxi driver for Moscow, leans out of the cab and whistles. "What the devil is that?" "American Jeep," says his mechanic, spitting into the snow. "Lend-lease. They call it Willys." Varnin jumps down to take a closer look. The Soviet driver, a freckled boy no older than 19, grins proudly as he guns the engine. The machine responds like a stallion. No choking, no delay. Varnin circles it, tracing the crisp welds with his glove. No leaks, no rust. In this mud. He kneels to inspect the tires, deep-treaded and firm. "We have been fighting 3 years, and only now we see this?" The Willys MB had begun arriving in Soviet convoys through Murmansk and Iran the previous year. At first, commanders treated them as novelties. But soon on the endless steppes and marshes where Soviet trucks bogged down daily, the Jeep proved something no propaganda could deny. American machines were built for endurance. The Soviet soldiers nicknamed it WWII, the Great One. They strapped machine guns to its rear, ferried wounded men under fire, even used it to drag artillery through marshes where horses refused to go. A Red Army mechanic joked, "It runs on air and American stubbornness." Unlike their own WWII Jeeps, crude imitations reverse-engineered from old Ford models, the Willys required almost no maintenance. Spare parts arrived in crates, perfectly interchangeable. Manuals printed in Cyrillic taught crews how to rebuild an engine in the field in less than an hour. The result was astonishing. Units that received Jeeps could cover twice the ground in half the time. Officers called them war's cavalry. Scouts, medics, and radio men rode them straight through artillery zones where no truck dared go. But for Soviet soldiers who'd grown up fixing machinery with hammers and wire, it was more than a tool. It was proof. Proof that the Western Allies lived in another industrial world. One night, around a campfire near the front, a mechanic named Petrov said quietly, "If the Americans can make thousands of these, imagine their tanks, their planes." Another soldier laughed bitterly. "Then maybe they can win the war while we freeze in them." But Varnin shook his head. He looked at the Jeep's silhouette against the embers. "No," he said, "they just build faster. We still have to fight." The machine purred softly beside them, its metal still warm from the day's drive. The Willys Jeep, forged in Detroit and Toledo, had now crossed oceans, traversed continents, and proven something no propaganda could erase. On the battlefield of mud and steel, the most powerful weapon wasn't always the biggest gun. It was the machine that never stopped moving. July 1943. After the Battle of Kursk, the steppe smolders with the wreckage of what the Germans had called Citadel, Operation Citadel. Burnt Panthers, twisted Panzers, and shattered half-tracks lie strewn across the wheat fields. Amid this mechanical graveyard, German engineers from the 3rd Panzer Army walk slowly between smoking hulls. They are not searching for their own machines. They are searching for ideas. One of them, Hauptmann Ernst Haller, a mechanical engineer from Stuttgart, kneels beside a captured Willys Jeep abandoned by retreating Soviet scouts. Its hood is dented by shrapnel, windshield cracked, but somehow, when he twists the ignition key, the engine still coughs, then starts. He lets it idle, listening to the low rhythmic hum, so unlike the sharp, metallic chatter of German motors. Haller mutters, "Es läuft immer noch." It's still running. He opens his notebook and begins to sketch the layout, the inline-4 engine, the short wheelbase, the shock absorbers that actually work. To his left, another engineer studies the leaf spring suspension. "It's ugly," he says, "but it works everywhere." And that's when the realization begins to take root, not in one mind, but across the entire logistical core of the Wehrmacht. Germany, the supposed master of precision engineering, has lost the war of simplicity. The Kübelwagen, their own light vehicle, is clever but fragile, too dependent on well-maintained roads. The Jeep, by contrast, is agricultural, almost crude, but can survive abuse, frost, and mud. In a technical report filed to the Army High Command weeks later, Haller writes, "The American vehicle demonstrates total standardization. Any soldier can repair it with minimal training. Components are replaceable rather than retooled. Its construction suggests a doctrine of quantity and reliability over artistry." He underlines one phrase 3 times. They build for war, not for beauty. Berlin receives hundreds of such observations as captured Jeeps appear across multiple fronts. Some are disassembled in aircraft hangars and research facilities in Königsberg and Vienna. Engineers marvel at how few moving parts it contains, and how accessible every bolt and wire is. The Ministry of Armaments, under Albert Speer, quietly circulates a report acknowledging the Jeep's efficiency. Speer himself remarks during a conference, "The Americans have achieved the impossible. They've made reliability an industrial product." By then, whispers among the troops have become a kind of grim folklore. Men say a Jeep can swim in mud, freeze in snow, and still wake up before dawn. Mechanics swear they've seen Jeeps that drove with 2 flat tires or after losing a wheel entirely. The Germans begin converting captured Jeeps into command cars, reconnaissance units, even mobile field kitchens. They carry SS officers, medical teams, and radio operators. Some are given camouflage paint, others repurposed to tow artillery. One officer jokes darkly in a letter home, "If we could build these, perhaps we would already be in Moscow." But beneath the humor is resignation. The soldiers and engineers alike now understand what the Willys Jeep represents, not merely a vehicle, but the industrial philosophy of the enemy. Mass production without compromise. And in that understanding lies a quiet fear. Because the war of tanks and guns might still be fought on the battlefield. But the war of machines had already been lost in the factories of America. September 1943, Detroit, Michigan. While the soldiers on the Eastern Front trudged through mud and fire, across the Atlantic the battle was fought in light and steel. Miles from the front, factory whistles screamed through the night like artillery shells. In the heart of the industrial Midwest, the Ford, Willis Overland, and American Bantam plants roared, a symphony of presses, welders, and riveters that never slept. Inside the Willis plant in Toledo, conveyor belts carried bare Jeep frames like skeletal creatures through showers of sparks. Women in overalls, Rosie the Riveters, as newspapers call them, fitted engines, bolted axles, tightened hoses. Each worker knew their task by heart. Each Jeep was born, tested, and shipped in less than 2 days. A foreman shouted over the din, "Another 1,000 this week. Let's keep 'em rolling." And they did. By the end of 1943, American factories had produced over 270,000 Jeeps, each nearly identical, each ready to start in deserts, jungles, or frozen steppes. The Jeep had become the DNA of Allied mobility. General George C. Marshall called it America's greatest single contribution to modern warfare. Eisenhower went further. The Jeep, the Dakota, and the landing craft were the 3 tools that won the war. The assembly line became a front of its own, a war fought with blueprints, not bullets. Men who'd never seen Europe were, unknowingly, deciding the outcome of battles thousands of miles away. Every time a crate left the Toledo docks stamped Willys MB for export, it carried not just metal, but morale. By contrast, Germany's production was strangled by bureaucracy, scarcity, and over-design. Factories scattered, bombed, and fractured. Precision parts meant slow assembly. Each vehicle was a work of art. But art couldn't win a war that demanded multiplication. In the Allied supply depots at Tehran and Murmansk, Soviet officers stood slack-jawed as ships unloaded endless rows of crates marked USA. When they pried them open, they found disassembled Jeeps packed like puzzles. Engines in one box, chassis in another, wheels wrapped in grease paper. It was mechanical poetry. Within hours, Soviet mechanics could assemble them and drive them straight into battle. In his field diary, one Red Army logistician wrote, "They do not send us machines, they send us movement. And everywhere those machines went, they carried more than soldiers. They carried symbols." To a British sapper in Tunisia, the Jeep was freedom from trudging across the dunes. To a paratrooper in Normandy, it was the promise of extraction. To a Soviet partisan, it was the sudden gift of mobility, the ability to strike and vanish. On the other side, in the cold bunkers of the Wehrmacht's logistics office, reports poured in. Enemy light vehicles multiply faster than we can destroy them. Captured Jeep units now in Soviet command use American gasoline. Our supplies cannot match their efficiency. The Reich's officers tried to calculate how many of these infernal little machines existed. The numbers never stopped rising. 100,000, 200,000, 500,000. And yet each soldier who saw one in motion, bounding across a cratered field, headlights flicking through smoke, understood the truth better than any statistic. The Jeep wasn't just transportation. It was the embodiment of industrial democracy, cheap, reliable, and everywhere at once. In the war's brutal arithmetic, that made it priceless. May 1945. Bavaria, Germany. The war is ending. The thunder of artillery fades into a long, exhausted silence. Columns of surrendering German troops stretch down the roads, gray uniforms dulled by months of retreat, helmets slung low. Among them, parked at crossroads and village squares, stand hundreds of Willys Jeeps bearing white stars and fresh mud. For men like Feldwebel Karl Weiss, who first saw one outside Kharkov 2 years before, it's a strange full circle. The machine that once symbolized curiosity now symbolizes defeat. Yet even in surrender, the sight still draws quiet respect. He watches as an American sergeant, sleeves rolled, hops from the driver's seat of a Jeep. The man opens the hood, wipes his hands on a rag, and smiles. The engine hums as smoothly as it did the day it left Toledo. Weiss mutters to himself, "It never dies." The sergeant, a broad-shouldered kid from Ohio, doesn't understand the words, but nods anyway. There's a kind of universal understanding between mechanics, between soldiers who've lived and bled beside their machines. Behind them, convoys of Jeeps roll in, part of the occupying forces. Some tow supply trailers, others carry medics or MPs. The roads once dominated by panzers now echo with the lighter, steady rumble of Willys engines. It feels like an invasion of endurance itself. In the shattered towns of Germany, civilians gather to watch the Allied columns pass. They whisper about these small vehicles that seem to appear everywhere, escorting officers, hauling prisoners, ferrying bread. To the defeated, they look like symbols of efficiency, modernity, and something more abstract, a new kind of power. American war correspondents photograph the scenes. One Life magazine caption reads, "The car that helped win the war, half truck, half horse, all heart." In Moscow, a similar machine rolls through Red Square during the victory parade. Stalin's generals stand stiffly at attention as thousands of troops march behind American Jeeps, their engines echoing between the walls of the Kremlin. The same machine that had carried Soviet scouts through minefields now leads the parade of triumph. When the numbers are finally tallied, the magnitude becomes clear. Over 640,000 Jeeps produced, used by the US, Britain, Canada, Free France, the Soviet Union, and dozens of smaller Allied forces. A vehicle born from necessity and elevated to legend. Historians later write that no single machine better symbolized 20th century warfare's industrial heart. Tanks and planes may have defined battles, But the Jeep defined movement. It made war portable. It turned mud into highway, distance into advantage. Decades later, in peacetime Europe, farmers would buy surplus Jeeps at auctions. Children would climb into them, unaware that these humble vehicles had once outlasted empires. Even now, restored examples still run, their engines purring softly, stubbornly refusing to die. Back in Germany, Weiss, now a prisoner working on rebuilding roads, sees one again in 1946, this time hauling timber for reconstruction. The same sturdy frame, the same simple growl. He pauses his work, watches it pass, and almost smiles. "It conquered us without firing a shot," he says quietly, "just by never breaking down." For all the speeches and treaties that ended the Second World War, perhaps nothing captured its lesson more clearly than that small, unassuming machine. A symbol not of destruction, but of durability. The Willys Jeep had done more than survive the war. It had defined it.